Are you eating healthy, cutting calories, walking daily, or yet still gaining weight or feeling exhausted by midday? Here's what's really going on inside your body. Your metabolism isn't failing you. Your hormones are being led by the foods you choose. Most diets address symptoms, calories, steps, scale numbers, but rarely the root causes. How your liver processes fuel, how your insulin signals fat storage, and how the body prioritizes glucose over burning fat for energy. Let's start with a simple physiology fact. Insulin is the body's master fat storage hormone. Whenever you eat digestible carbohydrates, bread, rice, fruit, starchy vegetables, sugar, your pancreas secretes insulin to manage the incoming glucose. Insulin doesn't just help shuttle sugar into cells. It tells your body to store fuel instead of burning it. High insulin, your fat locked away. Low insulin, your fat becomes fuel. And here's the profound part. When you drastically reduce carbohydrates, especially to a zero carbohydrate or near zero level, you aren't just cutting calories. You are shifting the very fuel your body prefers. You push your metabolism toward burning stored fat instead of constantly refilling fat with every meal. What the research shows is that diets extremely low in carbs can rapidly lower insulin, reduce visceral fat, improve glucose control, and change your body's metabolic priorities, even without strict calorie counting. In this guide, I'm going to break down the science of zero carb. What it is, how it works, the real physiology behind insulin and fat loss, and exactly how to do it in daily life without confusion. By the end of this video, you'll know why carbs are a fat storage signal, how zero carb changes your metabolism, what foods to eat and avoid, how to manage hormones naturally, and simple lifestyle habits that accelerate fat burning. Today, we're going to break this down into 6 core science-backed insights so you understand not just what to eat on a zero-carb approach, but why it works at a metabolic level. Here's what we'll cover. Insulin is the real fat storage switch, and zero carb lowers it faster than almost any other dietary strategy. Your liver controls the metabolic transition from sugar burner to fat burner, and most people never give it the conditions it needs to switch. Zero carb is not no vegetables, it's no insulin spikes. Understanding which foods truly contain digestible carbs and which don't. Protein is powerful, but too much can stall fat loss because of gluconeogenesis and its effect on insulin. Electrolytes, cortisol, and adaptation matter. Why people feel tired, headachy, or constipated when they do this incorrectly. Metabolic flexibility is the long-term goal. Zero carb isn't just about fast fat loss. It's about healing insulin resistance and restoring hormonal balance. This is not about extremes. This is about understanding physiology. Here's what's really going on inside your body when you remove carbohydrates. Your body has 2 main fuel systems, glucose and fat, but it cannot run both at full speed simultaneously. Insulin acts like a traffic controller. When insulin is high, fat burning is blocked. When insulin falls, fat cells open. Zero carb is simply a tool to lower insulin consistently enough and long enough for your body to access stored fat again. And when that happens, something powerful shifts. Hunger stabilizes, energy smooths out, brain clarity improves, and fat loss becomes a hormonal consequence, not a willpower battle. Now let's go deeper. Next, we'll unpack the most important piece, why insulin, not calories, determines whether you burn fat or store it. Let's start with the most misunderstood concept in weight loss. Most people think body fat is controlled by calories. Eat less, move more. That's the advice. But here's what's really going on inside your body. Fat storage is hormonally regulated, and insulin is the primary signal. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine your fat cells are like a storage garage. Insulin is the garage door. When insulin is elevated, the door closes. You cannot get fuel out. When insulin drops, the door opens, and stored fat becomes available for energy. Every time you eat carbohydrates, even healthy ones like oatmeal, fruit, or sweet potatoes, your blood sugar rises. Your pancreas releases insulin. And insulin tells your body two things: store incoming glucose, stop burning fat. That second part is critical. Even moderate insulin elevations suppress lipolysis, the breakdown of stored fat. This is well-established physiology. If insulin is present at meaningful levels, fat burning is dramatically reduced. Now here's the key. You cannot burn fat efficiently while insulin remains chronically elevated. And for many people with insulin resistance, insulin stays elevated far longer than they realize, even between meals. Zero carb works quickly because it removes the primary stimulus for insulin secretion, digestible carbohydrates. Protein causes a smaller insulin response. Fat causes almost none. When insulin drops and stays low, something powerful happens. Hormone-sensitive lipase activates. Fatty acids are released. The liver begins producing ketones. The body shifts to fat as its dominant fuel. Hunger decreases because blood sugar is stable. Energy stabilizes because you're no longer riding glucose spikes. Cravings diminish because insulin isn't driving them. This is not magic. It's metabolic biochemistry. If this is helpful so far, consider subscribing. I post content like this every day for people serious about fixing the root cause, not just chasing symptoms. Next, we're going to talk about the organ that makes this transition possible, your liver, and why most people never fully activate their fat-burning system. Now let's go deeper, because lowering insulin is only the first step. The real metabolic shift happens in one organ, your liver. Here's what's really going on inside your body. Your liver is your metabolic command center. It decides whether you burn sugar, store fat, make glucose, or produce ketones, and it responds directly to insulin levels. When carbohydrates are present, the liver prioritizes, storing glucose as glycogen, converting excess glucose into fat, de novo lipogenesis, suppressing ketone production. But when carbohydrates are removed and insulin falls, the liver changes roles. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Think of your liver as a hybrid engine. It can run on gasoline, glucose, or electricity, fat, ketones, but it cannot fully switch modes unless the gasoline tank runs low. Most people never empty the glucose tank. Even small amounts of carbohydrates keep the liver partially locked in sugar-burning mode. Glycogen stays topped off. Insulin never fully drops. Ketone production remains minimal. Zero carb accelerates this process because it rapidly depletes liver glycogen. Within 24 to 48 hours, the body begins increasing fat oxidation significantly. Within several days, ketone production becomes measurable. Over weeks, the metabolic machinery becomes more efficient. What the research shows is that sustained carbohydrate restriction increases fat oxidation, reduces liver fat accumulation, and improves markers of insulin sensitivity, even without calorie restriction. And here's something critical for long-term health. When the liver accumulates fat, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, insulin resistance worsens. The pancreas works harder. Blood sugar rises, inflammation increases. Zero carb gives the liver metabolic relief. By removing constant glucose input, you reduce fat production in the liver and allow it to export stored fat. Over time, this improves insulin signaling throughout the body. Now, practically speaking, how do you support this transition? Hydrate aggressively, 2 to 3 liters of water daily. Increase sodium intake during adaptation. 4 to 5 grams daily unless medically contraindicated. Eat adequate protein, not excessive. Don't fear dietary fat. It becomes your primary fuel. Allow 2 to 4 weeks for full adaptation. Fatigue in week 1 is not failure. It's metabolic transition. In the next section, we'll clarify something that confuses many people. What exactly counts as zero carb? And which foods truly keep insulin low? Now let's clear up a major misunderstanding. Zero carb does not mean starvation. It does not mean nutrient deficiency. And it does not mean eating nothing but butter. Zero carb means removing digestible carbohydrates, the foods that significantly raise blood glucose and insulin. Here's what's really going on inside your body when you choose foods. Carbohydrates break down into glucose. Glucose raises insulin. Insulin blocks fat burning. So the goal isn't perfection. It's keeping insulin consistently low enough to unlock stored fat. Let me explain this with a simple visual. On one side of the whiteboard, we draw foods that spike insulin. On the other side, foods that barely move it. Foods that spike insulin. Sugar, all forms. Grains, wheat, rice, oats, corn. Starches, potatoes, sweet potatoes. Most fruit, beans, and legumes. Even healthy carbs raise insulin. Your pancreas does not care if the glucose came from kale juice or candy. Now, here's the zero carb side. Foods that contain virtually no carbohydrates. Beef, lamb, pork, chicken, turkey, fish and seafood, eggs, animal fats, tallow, butter, ghee. These foods contain protein and fat has almost zero insulin impact. Now, here's where people get confused. What about vegetables? Leafy greens contain minimal digestible carbs. For some people, they're metabolically neutral. For others, especially those with severe insulin resistance, even small carb loads can slow progress. Zero carb in its strictest form is animal-based. But metabolically speaking, the real question is, does this food spike insulin? That's the filter. Now let's talk protein. Protein does stimulate insulin, but it also stimulates glucagon, which balances blood sugar. The key is adequate protein, not excessive. Rough guideline: 0.71 gram per pound of ideal body weight. Too little protein, muscle loss. Too much protein, increased gluconeogenesis. If this is helping clarify things, consider subscribing. I post practical, physiology-based tools like this every day. Next, we're going to talk about something most people overlook when going zero carb: electrolytes, cortisol, and why adaptation symptoms happen, and how to avoid them. Now we need to talk about why some people try zero carb and feel terrible. Headaches, fatigue, brain fog, muscle cramps, constipation, and they think, this diet isn't for me. But here's what's really going on inside your body. When insulin drops, your kidneys release sodium. Insulin tells the kidneys to retain salt. When insulin falls, sodium loss increases rapidly. That sodium loss pulls water with it. And when water drops, potassium and magnesium can follow. This is why the so-called keto flu happens. It's not carb withdrawal. It's an electrolyte shift. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine your body is a swimming pool. Carbohydrates keep the water level high because insulin retains fluid. Remove carbs, insulin drops, and the drain opens. If you don't refill the minerals, you feel depleted. The solution is not more carbs. The solution is mineral support. Practical protocol during the first 2 to 3 weeks. Sodium, 4 or 5 grams per day, unless medically contraindicated. Add 1 to 2 cups of broth daily. Salt your food generously. Potassium from whole foods like meat and optional leafy greens. Magnesium glycinate or citrate, 300-400 milligram at night. Now let's talk about cortisol. If calories are too low during adaptation, your body perceives stress. Cortisol rises, sleep worsens. Blood sugar may increase temporarily. Zero carb is not starvation. You must eat enough fat to replace the removed carbohydrates. Fat becomes your primary fuel source. If you undereat fat, the body compensates with stress hormones, warning signs you're underfueling, waking at 3 a.m., racing heart, persistent fatigue, cold intolerance. The goal is metabolic transition, not metabolic stress. Adaptation typically takes 3-5 days for glycogen depletion, 2-4 weeks for efficient fat oxidation, 6-12 weeks for deep metabolic flexibility. Be patient with the process. In the next section, we'll address a powerful but often ignored concept: how zero carb improves insulin resistance long term, and why metabolic flexibility is the real goal for longevity. Now we move beyond fast fat loss, because zero carb is not just about shrinking your waistline. It's about restoring metabolic flexibility. Here's what that means. A metabolically flexible body can switch between fuels, glucose when needed, fat when appropriate, without dramatic energy crashes, cravings, or inflammation. Most modern adults are metabolically inflexible. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine a hybrid car that's supposed to switch between electric and gas, but the battery system is damaged, so it runs almost entirely on gasoline, inefficiently. That's what chronic high-carb intake does to the human metabolism. When insulin stays elevated for years, fat cells become resistant to release. The liver accumulates fat. Muscle cells stop responding properly to insulin. The pancreas compensates by producing more insulin. This is the early pathway toward type 2 diabetes. What the research shows is that sustained carbohydrate restriction can significantly improve insulin sensitivity, reduce visceral fat, and lower fasting insulin levels, sometimes dramatically, especially in individuals with metabolic syndrome. Here's what's really happening physiologically. When you consistently keep insulin low, fat cells shrink, inflammatory signaling decreases, mitochondria increase fat oxidation capacity, the pancreas reduces insulin output. Over time, your body regains the ability to burn fat efficiently. Now, here's the key distinction. Zero carb can be a therapeutic phase, especially for people with severe insulin resistance, obesity, or fatty liver. But the end goal isn't restriction forever. The goal is lower fasting insulin, improve liver health, restore insulin sensitivity, stabilize energy, rebuild metabolic flexibility. For some people, that may mean staying very low carb long term. For others, it may mean strategically reintroducing small amounts of whole food carbohydrates once insulin resistance improves. You measure progress not by weight alone, but by waist circumference, fasting insulin, triglyceride to HDL ratio, stable energy, reduced cravings. Zero carb is a tool. Metabolic flexibility is the outcome. Next, we'll talk about who should be cautious with zero carb and how to personalize this approach safely and intelligently. Now let's be responsible and precise. Zero carb is powerful, but powerful tools must be used wisely. Here's what's really going on inside your body when you dramatically lower carbohydrates. You are changing hormonal signaling, fluid balance, thyroid conversion, and stress response. For many people, that's healing. For some, it requires careful monitoring. Who should approach this with medical supervision? Individuals on insulin or blood sugar lowering medications. Those with advanced type 2 diabetes, people with adrenal dysfunction or chronic high cortisol, pregnant or breastfeeding women, anyone with a history of eating disorders. Why? Because when insulin drops quickly, blood sugar can drop quickly, especially if medications aren't adjusted. That's not a diet problem. That's a medication mismatch. Now let's talk thyroid. When carbohydrates are drastically reduced, T3, active thyroid hormone, may temporarily decrease. This is often a normal adaptive response, your body becoming more efficient at burning fat. But if calories are too low or stress is high, thyroid symptoms can emerge. This is why personalization matters. Let me explain this simply. Zero carb works best when three conditions are met. Insulin is elevated or insulin resistance is present. Protein intake is adequate. Stress and sleep are managed. If sleep is poor, cortisol remains high. If cortisol is high, blood sugar rises. If blood sugar rises, insulin follows. You cannot out-diet chronic stress. Practical safeguards. Prioritize 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Stop eating 3 hours before bed. Morning sunlight within 20 minutes of waking. Resistance training 2 to 3 times per week. Avoid excessive cardio during adaptation. And most importantly, monitor, don't guess. Track. Fasting glucose. Fasting insulin if possible. Waist measurement. Energy levels. Zero carb is not about punishment. It's about restoring hormonal balance. Now let's bring this all together and talk about how you can apply this starting today. Let's recap what we've uncovered. Insulin, not calories, is the master regulator of fat storage. When insulin is elevated, fat is locked away. When insulin falls, fat becomes fuel. Zero carb works because it removes the strongest stimulus for insulin, digestible carbohydrates. When that happens, the liver shifts into fat-burning mode. Glycogen depletes. Ketones rise. Hunger stabilizes. Visceral fat begins to decrease. Electrolytes must be supported. Protein must be adequate, not excessive. Stress and sleep must be optimized. And the ultimate goal isn't restriction forever. It's metabolic flexibility, a body that can burn fat efficiently and handle carbohydrates strategically without metabolic chaos. Here's your challenge. For the next 14 days, remove digestible carbohydrates. Eat whole animal-based foods, salt your meals, hydrate intentionally, track your waste and your energy. Don't just watch the scale, observe your metabolism. Try just one of these changes today and track how your body responds. If this added value, like the video and subscribe to join others optimizing their health naturally. Your metabolism is not broken. It's waiting for the right signal. And now you understand how to send it.